Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 2011 budget cycle. Tonight's meeting is being broadcast on Metro TV. I've got a couple of announcements to start the evening with. My name is John Borofsky. I'm the chair of the Budget Committee this year, and I'd like to thank everybody for being here and anybody who's watching at home, and staff and the public that has joined us this evening. Just a reminder, please, everybody speak into the microphones. That will help the people who are at home. Also, there's some amongst us that have hearing impairments that will be using assistance this evening, and the only way that they pick that up is through the microphones. So if you can keep that in mind when making your things, also try not to ruffle papers near it. We're going to start off the evening tonight with a couple of housekeeping things, procedural things, and then we'll get right into John's budget presentation. After that, we'll have a break. We'll come back and hear public testimony, public comments, and then there will be an opportunity for the committee to ask questions and get information requests in. At this time, I would like to put out a couple of procedural things. When we do get into doing our questions and rounds, we've decided that we will do 2-minute rounds. There'll be two 2-minute rounds and a possible third-minute round, and the third round of 1 minute, I'm going to use the discretion of the chair to see it as it goes. You know, I'll try and give it, but if we're running up against time crunches, I may opt to move on without the third round. There will also be the opportunity for what we did last year with the super round. If you feel that you're getting to a point in your questions or discussions and the timer is running down, you'll have an opportunity once during each meeting to extend another 2 minutes without going to the back of the queue. I think that worked well last year, so we're going to try and continue that on. With that, are there any questions or comments from the body at this point? Okay. First item of business will be to approve the minutes that were presented in the packet. These are the minutes from the February 2nd, 2010 meeting. And if there's any, is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
And any comments or questions? All those in favor, please indicate. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else that I have to. I'll read these when we get into our other things. So,
John?
yes.
Just one thing. For the minutes recorder on the vote, in the past, we've indicated verbally, so the minutes recorder can make sure that they get the right count.
Yeah, and I'll do that on procedural ones where it's unanimous. I'll be less stringent on that, but thank you for reminding me of that. With that, I would like to turn it over to the city manager for his budget presentation.
Thank you, John. And feels like it's been a long haul over the last many months, and it's good to come to this point. Before I get started on the budget, just a couple of things. I want to say a really heartfelt thanks to our staff over the last couple of years. This has been a really challenging financial times, and all of you know that, and I'm going to talk about that here in just a minute. But we've really had a great group of staff that have put in lots of hours, put in a lot of thought, put in a lot of creativity and innovation, and have just plain put in a lot of hard work to present this budget tonight. And special thanks to the execs who I think provided some really nice leadership. Our division managers is that core group of people that really, where the rubber meets the road, they're responsible for really figuring out how to implement policies that have come from the execs and really do a lot of the analysis. And so I think they've done a great job this year also. And then special thanks to Sue Cutsa-George and her team in the finance department. You know, she's come on board as the finance director. Obviously, she has a wealth of experience in a variety of things, but she has really done a yeoman's job in sort of getting us to this point. And so we anticipate a lot of vigorous discussion. We anticipate some things in this budget that you will like, and there are some things that you probably won't like. There are things in this budget that we don't want to have to present. So we anticipate all of that over the next couple of weeks. But just know that there's been a real A-team effort to present what we think is a very thoughtful and reasonable budget. A couple things that I think are sort of setting the stage. We really started on this journey even the year before I came here, what was then called budgeting for outcomes. And that got started back in the good old days when we were really only trying to solve $1 million or $2 million problem in our general fund. But we have really been on that same track over the last couple of years. We haven't called it budgeting for outcomes, but there was a lot of front-end work that was done on that, and we've been pursuing that. And you'll see that as I talk further on. But remember the financial storm that we've been trying to address. And it's really a three-front storm. The first that started years ago, we started to get a little bit of structural imbalance, and I'm primarily talking about the general fund now, and so, but it bleeds over to other funds. But there's that little bit of that structural imbalance where expenditures were creeping up faster than revenues. And so even 2 or 3 years ago, there was this $1.5 million of we're drawing down our reserves in order to balance the budget. And so if you were to go back and past budget messages, there's some consistent themes over several years about that. Good decisions around doing some of those things, very much needed. But we kind of knew there was a little bit of this imbalance. So that's really the first front that is going on. And then we had the recession that really has created a lot of financial anxiety, and that is just the whole dampening of the economy. And as we talked quite a bit last year and over this last many months, that's impacted particularly on the revenue side for us. As development has gone down, what that means is property tax, franchise fees, all those kinds of things have just flattened out or decreased. And so that means while the expenditures have been going up, it's been creating even a larger gap. So that's two fronts. And then the third front was the anticipation of having to absorb the full library levy in FY12, and also substantial increases in PERS in FY12 and FY14. So we have been working on all three of those financial fronts to present the budget. It's almost a $500 million budget when we think about all funds, and the general fund is a plus or minus $160 million. So we'll talk a little bit about where we tried to be. You might remember this from last year, but our goals and our stewardship model has been to balance fiscal responsibility with customer service and employee satisfaction, and really focusing on making sure when we make decisions that those stay in balance and not emphasize one over the other. So for example, it could be very easy to really scale back on finances and really cut the budget drastically, but that also then impacts services and employees. So we've been trying to balance this as part of our overall stewardship responsibility. In FY10, last year, we had the $12 million general fund gap. We spent a lot of time getting information and ideas from employees through think tanks, through victory gardens, through a whole host of things. They provided a lot of the solutions for things that were presented last year. Our strategy, one of the important strategies, has been to reduce our organizational footprint. And as you'll see, over last year and this year, we will have reduced our total FTE count by 80. But our strategy in FY10 was to minimize impact on community services, avoid layoffs, and develop a sustainable budget. And we did well in FY10. Some things worked extremely well. We went ahead and got some innovation going in some fleet. The way we did some internal service funds, those are our admin, central service kinds of operations with finance and personnel and technology and those kinds of things. And we're able to find some efficiencies there. We were able to not transfer some dollars to our capital facilities account. We achieved some of our personnel savings that we had hoped to last year. And then we reduced our footprint by about 37 to 40 FTE last year. So those things worked really well. Those were captured ongoing savings that as we moved into FY11. There are a couple of things that were not fully realized. We didn't fully realize all of the personnel savings that we had hoped in that $12 million plan. We've talked about the grant revenues. We had hoped for and worked extremely hard to have $750,000 worth of new grant revenue to come in to offset operating costs. We achieved some of that, but not all of that. And then we had anticipated some additional franchise fees from Northwest Natural Gas based on what they anticipated as a rate increase. The reality is they actually did a rate reduction, so they changed course. And so there were some dollars that weren't realized there. So that part then carries over into FY11. In FY11, what I want to show is if you look back at FY10 where the lines cross, the solid line is revenues, the dotted line is expenditures. You might remember the budget. We lived within our means. This is an annual operating statement. So what that says is that our expenditures were less than or equal to our revenues. That's good. That's structurally balanced. Based on, remember last year we talked about there were still going to be some gaps coming forward to this year. We knew some of that, PERS, the library, some of those kinds of things. Those unrealized gains, it turns out that the FY11 gap to fill is $5.7 million of ongoing. What's different about that, we've talked anywhere between 6 and 6.5, but remember we're constantly updating information. And so as we've updated information, 5.7 is the gap that the FY11 budget is trying to fill. What this shows, of course, is if you don't fill that gap, all it does is it continues a structural imbalance. And then the next slide is probably my favorite slide, which says if we don't close the gap with ongoing savings, if we just use one-time savings, what eventually happens is that red line, and we move into the forecast period to over a $30 million deficit. Obviously, we can't do that. That's not sustainable. So that's part of the reason why we can't ignore that $5.7 million gap. So here's been our approach for FY11. The basic concept of minimizing impact on service and employees and developing a sustainable budget hasn't changed. That's been our primary focus. But in addition to that, the budget is really set up to strategically align behind community goals and priorities, often informed by Eugene counts, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Living within our means continues to be a high priority. Building our reserves towards a goal of 8%. This is that savings account that what we want to do is try to maintain in order to be able to weather through normal fluctuations in revenue and expenses, operating revenues, expenses, or an unanticipated one-time big expense. So we need to have those revenues into the future. The budget is set to create a sustainable portfolio of services. That means that what we wanted to do is say, here's the services that we can support into the future given the current revenue stream that we have. So what you see or what's been presented to you is what we believe is a sustainable portfolio of services. It doesn't mean it's necessarily the ideal, but it's sustainable to keep us living within our means. We heard you, we heard others that said, we want to reduce incrementally. We don't want to wholesale get rid of services. So you'll find that we've tried to reduce incrementally. Maintaining access to city services. One of the pieces that came out of Eugene counts loud and clear was the community wants to maintain access to recreational facilities, the library, and those kinds of things. So our staff has been very creative, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Maintaining jobs and benefits. One of the goals that I and the executive team have had is to minimize our impact on our employees for a variety of reasons. And so we have been working extremely hard to maintain employment so displaced employees find new jobs within the city. Unfortunately, this year, there will be some employees that are laid off. We don't know that number yet because we're still working through that, and eventually the Budget Committee and the Council have to make some final decisions. We're keeping fee increases to a minimum, and you'll see that, and they're very targeted. And then we're investing strategically with one-time funds. This budget isn't about sort of folding in on ourselves and just trying to survive. Our purpose has been to actually land in a good place and prepare us strategically for the future. A couple things. Here's some things that I took into account when I talked about strategic alignment. A lot of input has come into that. Eugene counts, a variety of surveys, a variety of things that have gone on. And so what we're trying to do is align behind those priorities. We talked a little bit about that last year, that this year it was important to identify, fix on, and then align behind those priorities. Some of the things that, I'll come back to a few other things. The other framework that we've been working through is a triple bottom line framework. And so that's the environmental, social equity, and economic sides of that. And so what we try to do is have this goal of finding this sweet spot in there in which to land the FY11 budget. And so we spent time with our staff, on our human rights staff and our access and equity staff and a variety of people on the environmental side to try to ensure that we're maintaining balance between these triple bottom line items also. Briefly on the budget, again in FY11 we invited lots of input from staff throughout the organization at all levels to provide ideas and work with their division managers particularly to identify a variety of options. One of the things as we were looking for the gap, we asked our departments, each department, to find $3 million worth of savings within their department that they could implement if we needed to do that. And then the executive team, being informed by all these priorities and the variety of, chose the package that we think best meets those goals that I mentioned earlier a couple slides ago. So it's been a pretty involved, very involved process. So here's generally what the FY11 budget looks like. New revenues represent 7% of that 5.7, 390,000 of that, very targeted, that we'll talk about in a minute. We are sharing some costs with other funds. We're making some improvements and innovative changes in our internal service funds. And then there's about almost 50% of it is in program and service changes. And so one of the things I think important to know is while we have tried to minimize impacts, there are going to be some impacts. And we'll talk about those in more detail in here in a moment. On the revenue side, again, we are not wanting to balance the budget with new fees and new revenues this year, particularly as we continue to work through the recession and people in the community. But there are places that we think are very appropriate. The parking rate increase in and around the campus area, what that would represent is moving our fees to really match the fees that the university already charges or is planning to increase to. Is that right? And so, for example, the campus parking meter rate is $1.50, or they're planning to go to $1.50 per hour. Ours is currently $1, and so this would match the $1.50 at that point. And remember, these are our meters, not the ones that are on campus, and so it would match that. Parking permit, residential parking permit fee in this case would go from $20 a year to $40 per year. So that's what you talk about at that one up top. On the library side, a non-resident library card fee would go from $100 per year to $120 per year. There would be some changes in fines for turning materials in late, and so there's more detail of that in the budget itself. Also, we would be adding a new service that if you're not within the city limits, if you want access to the virtual branch library, you could subscribe to that for $50 per year. So that's a new service that somebody could choose to use also. On the miscellaneous side, we're proposing a voluntary dog park fee, not a mandatory fee, to see if there's some interest in the users of that to help contribute towards some of the maintenance. We're talking about some Wi-Fi sponsorships and a variety of other kind of miscellaneous pieces, but a relatively minor part of the whole budget. Our internal service fund savings, the top one there is one that we should talk about briefly. In the past, although in FY10 we did not, we would transfer $749,000 into our facilities replacement reserve. That facility replacement reserve, you might remember, is that $22 to $23 million that we are currently using for police facilities, city hall facilities discussion. We're proposing that we no longer transfer into that, the 749 into that reserve. One reason is that was primarily set up to build a consolidated city hall. This is that $125 million building, which I don't think anytime soon we are going to build that, and so I think it's okay not to continue to contribute toward that particular effort with this. There's better places to spend that money at this time. So that's one of the things that we're not doing. On the information services side, what that is they have researched and will be implementing a new system for our computer replacement and computer purchases. And in doing that, we'll actually be able to save some money out of that. The risk fund, if you think about our risk fund essentially as an insurance fund that we pay a premium, and if you're willing to have a higher deductible, your premium can be less. The same concept is we're willing to have a higher deductible, and therefore we can save money on the premium side. We're still within the best practices benchmark. We're moving a little bit along. They're willing to take a little bit more risk with that, but that's where we start collecting some of those. On the health plan premium increase, that $273,000 actually increase in cost, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then our fleet and radio side will also have a net increase on some of those internal service funds. But there's almost $1 million worth of savings as a result of some changes there. When we talk about sharing costs with other funds, essentially the idea on that is that there are some funds which can appropriately pay for, and again we're talking general fund services, but in the past they haven't been paying for that. So for example, we provide some maintenance along our waterways and stormwater facilities and adjacent facilities that the stormwater fund can appropriately pay for. And so that's that $403,000. We've said, okay, rather than the general fund paying for that, it can appropriately be paid for out of the stormwater fee. Engineering services is the same kind of a thing. Some of the work that they do is non-general fund work, and so this is transferring general fund to the non-general fund funds to do some of that non-general fund work. If you take a look at the ambulance transport fund, that in this budget represents a one-time general fund plug into the ambulance transport fund of $450,000. The recommendation I will have as we move forward is I think that can only be a one-time general fund plug, and that the ambulance transport fund needs to be a self-sustaining fund as we move forward. Here's on the program changes. You know, it's at 46%, and so this will just highlight a few of those. At the library, I want to commend the library staff. I think they've done a great job at figuring out how do they maintain all hours at all facilities and save over $400,000. And we've done that through innovation, staff efficiencies. The staff has weighed in on a whole lot of things, which actually save some money. We are going to reduce material purchases. What that means is every year we set aside and we purchase X amount of new books and magazines and subscription, all those kinds of things. We're going to be cutting that down in the out years. So we believe we still maintain above the average on our circulation, on our access to materials, et cetera, but there will be a decrease. It may mean that we'll be subscribing to less periodicals than we have in the past, as an example. We may purchase less children's books than we have in the past, which is what I didn't know is kind of interesting, that that's probably the one place where you can reduce the amount of material purchase, because kids are a relatively short time period in which they're reading kids' books. And so that group of kids gets through, the next group comes in, whatever books you have are really new to them, so they kind of work through. So I didn't know that. But the overall changes to the library are a little over $400,000. If you look at parks, remember there was that transfer of $400,000 over the stormwater side. This is what the actual general fund reduction will be, is $230,000. So reduce the frequency of mowing on our sports fields from twice a week to once a week. Services to Owens Rose Garden and Hendricks Park will be impacted. Again, we're not wholesaling, eliminating, but we are incrementally decreasing, and that will relate to the number of crew members that are currently maintaining those facilities. Fire and EMS, the $250,000. We've had the ongoing discussion of functional consolidation and efficiencies gained by combining some functions with Springfield, and so we'll get some savings out of that. They also will be looking at purchasing their fleet a little bit differently, a little bit more off the shelf as opposed to some of the customized pieces, so we're able to reduce by $250,000. No firefighters are impacted. We're not reducing any firefighter FTE as we go through this. Here. On the police side, we've had quite a bit of talk about the Downtown Safety Initiative, and Chief Kearns next week will be talking about the downtown and various other initiatives that he's pursuing and how he's repurposed some of his current budget to focus on some of those priorities. But we'll be adding a couple of positions to help with his data-led policing. He's repurposing existing funds, $300,000+, to focus on property crime reduction. And we'll also be adding a forfeiture coordinator position. The revenue that we anticipate receiving that will actually pay for this particular position. So on the police side, they're actually adding some revenue back into the system. Planning and development, there's two sides of this. One is the general fund, which is the $250,000, and that's primarily through the reduction of planners. And what that means is that there will be some, the work plan for our planners. We won't be able to be quite as flexible and be able to respond quite as quickly to items that are not already programmed on their work plan. And so some of those items will take longer to accomplish. The construction permits fund, which is really the significant one there, that's that self-sufficient, self-sustaining enterprise fund that its revenues come from permit fees, plan review fees. And so development's been down, so the revenue in that fund has gone down, and so the expenditures need to go down. And so that's what you see there. And so that does result in a number of job positions going away on inspectors and plan reviewers. So that's a significant piece there. On the recreation side, we're talking about delaying the opening of an Amazon pool for 4 weeks. One of the things that I talked about before that I think is a really good story is that we are maintaining access to these other recreation programs, not increasing the fees for those, which I think is important, and in fact will actually expand a youth and family program to try to capture actually some additional revenues to meet some demand. So I think that's a good story as we go forward, and in that the recreation staff has figured out how to do some things differently and actually save some dollars as we go forward with that. A couple other changes. Our outside contractual services in our prosecutor's office will be reducing that by a substantial amount based on some history over the last couple of years. We haven't needed quite as much outside attorney support. Some of our routine maintenance on off-street multi-use paths will be impacted. Now, they will be, if you have a pothole in one of those paths, they will go fix those, but the level of routine maintenance, preventative maintenance, would go down. Eliminating graffiti removal on private property. We continue to remove it on public property. We also have the Huckleberry Patrol that will continue to work, particularly in the greater downtown area, on private property as well as public property. We're also continuing to partner with DEI on graffiti removal in and around the downtown, so those will continue to occur. I think, frankly, the one we expect most of the energy around will be reducing Lane County Animal Services contract by $200,000, and so we expect that to be a vigorous discussion here over the next couple of weeks. And we've sent out some information on that, and I'd be happy to talk in more detail about why. But essentially, we want to be able to continue to maintain the services, but also want to look for additional models, or different models to provide that service. As we've gone through our budget, reality is our general fund we've been reducing that by 15 to 17% over the last couple of years. And we want to partner to find the best way to provide animal services in the community. Their budget increased by over 6% this year. So we're hoping to find some opportunities in that. But I think that's going to get a lot of vigorous discussion. And then also to reduce the council contingency down to $150,000. So that's a $90,000 decrease from that.
How much?
It's down to $150,000, and it represents a $90,000 decrease. Social service funding, I want to talk a little bit about this. We've had some conversations, but just to try to make sure we're all thinking the same thing. There's a couple of different components of our social services funding. One is the unallocated, undesignated dollars that we transfer to the Human Services Commission at the county. That's that first line. That's that $1,035,000. This year we transferred $1,035,000. FY11 we're proposing $1,035,000. FY12 it's $1,035,000 plus probably CPI, but we don't know that. So to make it easy, we're just using the same number. So the idea is that amount doesn't change. There's a Cahoots van that we currently fund at $250,000 per year. We want to continue to do that. Part of the Downtown Public Safety Initiative, we want to purchase and operate a second van. In FY11, there's a purchase cost that goes with that, but then it goes down as you start in FY12 on the operational side of things. The other components of our funding have been we transfer dollars over to HSC for designated agencies, and we designate some outside of the HSC structure. So that's at $392,000 in FY10, same amount in FY11. So you can see our FY11 social service funding is bumped up by $325,000 in FY11. In FY10, well, the other piece in FY10 is this $150,000, this one-time stabilization dollars. In FY11, we're proposing that we don't transfer that. The good news on the HSC side is they're carrying a balance now of $740-something thousand, which is good. And so, given all the various needs out there, we're not recommending that we transfer that $150,000 that we're hoping that they can use their current balance of almost $750,000 to sort of carry through what we would have spent that $150 on. In FY12, remember what we talked about is that bottom line figure, that 1.677 in FY10 would also be spent in FY12. The difference is the amount of money that is not already pre-designated for distribution to various agencies, because the second CAHOOTS vehicle is continuing to move forward as part of the downtown public safety program. Does that make sense? So that's what our proposal is as we're moving forward. I mentioned that we're also looking at making some strategic investments with one-time money. So these are not ongoing costs in some things that help us move the community forward and to align around some priorities. So this is our recommendation around implementation of our internal diversity and equity strategic plan, the continual work and implementation of the energy and climate change action plan. We also want to invest in implementing the Regional Economic Development Plan, the JEO strategy. We know the Olympic trials are coming in a couple years, so we want to start putting away some dollars that we know we will need for that, and that's that $200,000 at that time. I already mentioned the $450,000 one-time support for the ambulance transport fund, and then that planning services consulting for Envision Eugene, primarily $100,000. Remember, partly what we did, two things. One is we're reducing our total number of planners to capture the ongoing cost. And then two, we also, I think this Envision Eugene is probably the most important discussion we're going to have in this community over the next 12 plus months. And so we do want to have all the right skill set to be able to bring to bear on that. And so that helps us purchase some of those right skill sets for that. The budget that we present to you was not made without some difficult choices. I mentioned over the last couple years, we have spent a lot of time and energy and creative collective wisdom figuring out how to minimize impact on services, employees, and to reach a sustainable budget. We have come a long way in that. I think we are about at that place where the next tier of things that would have to really start being considered are some of these kinds of things, which now are different than a little bit of those incremental changes. So here are the things that, these are not in the budget.
Thank God.
But this is that next tier as we think about if we want something else, if there's some other choices we want to make, are there pieces in the budget we don't like? If we're looking at staying within this budget, here's some of the things that we started looking at but chose not to move toward. And there's some significant pieces there. Closing a pool, closing a downtown library on Fridays, or closing fire stations, rolling brownouts. That's essentially where you rotate on a daily basis. A fire station is not open for a particular day. So you can see the kinds of things that that are kind of in that next tier. And so I guess part of the message is while we are really trying to align strategically and we're trying to minimize impacts, as we keep going down this road, the impacts are much more significant. harder to see, but I do want to talk about, this is our forecast, and maybe I'll talk to you, hard to see my own on here. On the numbers, the first ones we want to talk about are on the expenditure side. Back side of your handout's the bigger copy. I'm not going to go through this whole thing. I just want to highlight a couple of things. On the expenditure side, as you take a look at going from estimated FY10 to proposed FY11, what you see is a decrease in our total expenditures, which is good. Remember, we're driving down costs. And then as we kind of move across there, we're trying to continue to have costs, our expenditures sort of flatten out, or at least not accelerate at a significantly higher than we would already anticipate. So what you see in FY12 is a pretty significant increase. But that really, remember, that relates to PERS and some of our library levy. So you'll see that same thing as you go from FY13 to FY14, a pretty significant increase. And because of anticipating that, if you were to go to the, let's do the surplus deficit real quick. That also shows up in our annual operating surplus deficit line, where our proposed FY11, we're in the black to the good by almost $1.2 million. In FY12, because of that PERS and library levy, our annual operating deficit, we're actually going to operate at a deficit, and then you see that pattern repeated in FY14. And then if we take a look at our reserve, what you see is as we're moving into FY11, we're accumulating some cash. We're accumulating that $10.4 million in cash, essentially. And the reason why we're doing that is then we're going to be able to draw that down to pay that FY12 hole that's created because of the levy and the PERS. Does that make sense? And then we start to draw cash up again, accumulate some cash, then it comes back down in FY14, and then it starts to build a little bit in the out years. As we get out to FY16, our reserve, our goal is 8%, but we're at 6.7% out at that point. So we're a little bit shy of what our benchmark is, but we're okay with that because things change as we go. But what we are doing, we're not over-accumulating cash and just stashing it away, because part of what we want to do is make sure we're using current money to pay for current services as we go. This isn't just about hoarding money, so we're not. But we're also accumulating enough cash to help us get through the bumps without having to make drastic changes on a year-to-year basis. And then we're accumulating a savings account to help us moderate increases into the future. Does that make sense? So this is what the FY11 budget results in this forecast. So, and this just talks about that versus that 8% target. So what you see coming from FY10 and 11, in 11 we're accumulating some cash above that 8% target. We're drawing it back down. As we move towards 14, we're drawing it back up, comes down, and then it kind of levels itself out because we've kind of drawn it down, and then it starts to build slowly towards that 8% in the out years past FY16. Turns out the whole savings account piece is one of the indicators that I look for when we talk about a sustainable budget as we go forward. It's not all just about the general fund. So there are some other funds here. We use this green, white, red. Green means we're good to go right now. Red, we have some concerns. The white or yellow is a little bit of caution. So the general fund, living within our means, that's what that FY11 operating surplus deficit means. Great, right? The fact that we're accumulated this almost 1.2, that's really good. Ending fund balance, a little bit of caution, but we think we're accumulating enough in order to kind of get us through. So we're comfortable but watching. The ambulance transport fund, as we know through the year, has been a difficult nut to crack. we need to continue to work on that this next year. We need to find a sustainable solution for that this next year. So it's in the red. By the end of this year, fiscal year, their savings account is essentially zero. So in order to make sure that they can operate next year, we are putting $450,000 of a one-time general fund subsidy into that fund. That'll help on the operating side, but that will also mean that part of their capital side is getting pushed out. So we need to keep thinking about it. Construction and rental housing, we've talked about that. What helps that is when the development occurs in the community and that picks up again, that's how that fund gets fixed. There's not a lot of other things we can do to bolster that up. The road fund, the good news on the road fund, well, that has been a discussion for the last several years. Kurt and his staff and the budget committee and the council, I think, have done a great job in stabilizing that. Now, why it's in the yellow and the white is we haven't completely figured out how to solve the whole backlog, but we're on the way. So that's a good news story. Yeah. The stormwater and the wastewater fund, the reason why they're cautioned in the FY operating surplus and deficit, kind of as a result of the overall recession. So that's some concern. But they have healthy fund balances, which help them moderate through these difficult times, which is exactly what the fund balances are supposed to do. A couple of things, FY 10 to 11 comparison. Essential business, that's really our internal operations has been decreasing. Our cultural and leisure total budgets have been decreasing, but as we've talked about, maintaining access actually has been, for the most part, maintained. The infrastructure, that decreased. The vast majority of that is represented by the construction and permit fund activity. On the public safety side, we're actually increased the total amount of public safety through Downtown Public Safety Initiative, as well as a couple things that Pete is doing on his data-led policing primarily. FTE per 1,000 population, we were at the lowest, 9.4, proposed in FY11 than we have been in more than 30 years. And remember, our conscious strategy has been to decrease our organizational footprint. Personnel costs are 60 to 70% of our costs. To create a sustainable budget, to live within our means, personnel has to be a part of that equation. We have been very thoughtful in that, working on voluntary severances, eliminating vacant positions, all of those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, we are at 9.4 FTE per 1,000. Talk a little bit about personal services. Now, this is just personnel services for all funds. So you can see wages as a part of that are 70%. We also have, obviously, the other 30% represent health benefits, retirement benefits, all those other kinds of things, or unemployment insurance, Social Security, and all of those kinds of things. But what you can see is our total amount of services costs are actually decreasing. And again, a lot of that has to do with the shrinking of the footprint, so we're actually moving down in that. These are contractual expenses that we have with our various bargaining units that are built into the FY11 budget. Remember, last year, part of what we included was a COLA freeze for the non-reps. IFF, the firefighters also took a COLA freeze last year, and IATSE, but we're not proposing COLA freezes this year as we move forward. So, and these are contractual amounts. Just briefly on healthcare costs, although healthcare costs continue to increase, probably the good news story out of that is we're about 3% less than the national trend. I credit Myrnie and her staff with a lot of that. Partly we're self-insured, but they aggressively manage that in a variety of ways. And so we're trying to maintain our health costs. As you saw on the previous slide, all employees do contribute towards their health care premium. And this employee contribution and it's it's approximately 800,000. It varies year to year, but if you were to take a look at previous years moving into the next year, it's between $800 and $1 million in which employees contribute. We do have an aging workforce, so that is something we are wanting to account for and are looking at, because as my generation sort of gets a little bit older, some of you are in that generation too. It's okay.
We're at least above average.
I know, finally. No, but as we kind of age, our health care costs will increase a little bit, and so we're trying to anticipate that as we go. Healthcare reform impact, we just don't know what that impact is, although we do expect it's going to cost money. There will be an increase in cost rather than a decrease in cost with that. We just don't know how much, whether it's a penny or $10. Upcoming challenges, we've talked a little bit about that. Continuing to make sure we maintain an adequate level of general fund reserve. And here's the best outcome for me as we move forward. We've gone through a lot of work these last 2 years to fill this $12 million and $5.7 million gap. If we stick a good landing on this FY11 budget, the best outcome is, barring some really financial hits that we just aren't anticipating, we don't want to have to keep going through the same exercise year after year after year. And so the path we have chosen is to take a long-term approach to a sustainable portfolio, appropriate amount of reserves, so we can weather through over the next many years, as opposed to having this year-to-year up and down. Talk about the ambulance transport fund. Absolutely need to figure out a sustainable solution to that. So we're going to be pressing hard for that. PERS increases in FY12 and 14. We built that into the budget to accommodate that, so we need to make sure that we're accomplishing that. Same with the local option levy. Those are part of that storm front that really has nothing to do with the recession. Our facilities replacement and maintenance funding, our parks and recreation capital, parks maintenance funding, we do have some needs that are going to be continuing out there that we need to try to figure out how to fund, or at least identify what those issues are and what those needs are. And so we will be spending some time internally and would want to have some conversations with you and the council individually around capital planning for some of these facilities as we move forward. So there's still a lot of work ahead of us. But what we're hoping is the conversation can be different than where we've been. Remember, where we've been is we're having to get the budget all within balance, structurally balanced. I think these conversations talk about, okay, what else is it that we want moving forward? How are we going to afford those? So I think it's less about taking a look at reducing services and filling gaps, but it's more about what's the plan for capital improvements or ongoing operations. So here's where I think we are in summary. The FY11 budget is strategically aligned behind the priorities that we've seen in Eugene counts. What we've seen there is public safety. This budget maintains, and in some places enhances, public safety through downtown public safety, the property crime initiative, and data-led policing initiative. It also is trying to increase or improve services with mergers with Springfield. So we are aligning behind that. When we talk about job creation, we are recommending some one-time money into implementing the Regional Economic Development Plan, so that aligns behind that. There is a lot of discussion around maintaining access for all incomes. We are doing that in this budget and being very creative about accomplishing that. When we talk about trying to take a look at energy and climate change, we're maintaining our sustainability programs, our equity and access programs, our neighborhood programs. None of that decreases, and we're looking for a one-time investment to implement some of those plans as we go forward. So this is aligned behind the priorities that we've been talking about. We live within our means. That means over the forecast period, the revenues and expenditures are equal, or revenues exceed expenditures. That's critical for the long-term health. We're starting to build reserves towards that 8% goal. We're moving it towards 6.7 as we move out to the forecast period. We're maintaining access to services. The library, no reduction in hours in the library at any of the branches in the downtown library. Our recreation facilities continue to stay open. The one exception to that is delayed opening of Amazon Pool. And so, but our rec centers and programming is not changing. In fact, we're trying to add some things strategically around that. So we're maintaining access, maintaining jobs and benefits in the organization. Yes, this year, unfortunately, we will have some layoffs, but we are working hard to minimize those in very thoughtful ways and have been planning for that for months. Minimizes fee increases, $390,000 total, very targeted around a couple of places which we think are appropriate, in which they match already existing fee structures that are in place in adjacent areas, or we think it's appropriate for, in some cases, non-residents to increase their participation in things like the library. And we're investing strategically in places that we need to invest, whether it's the things we've been talking about, or the Olympic trials, some of those kinds of things. And so with that, there's the budget.
All right. Thank you, John. Thank you, staff, for helping put this together. Looking at where we're at with time, we're scheduled to take a break at about 6:45 and reopen at 7 o'clock for public comment. That being said, for me personally, I think what would be good at this point would be just to open up the table and hear from the body as to reactions, concerns, what you would like to get out of this. Maybe not delve into the specific questions until we come back after the break and start doing that, but just kind of get a feel for where the body is after reviewing what we've gotten and take it from there. So without any objections, I would just like to open it up, and if anybody would like to speak. Mike, you can start us off, please.
Thank you. Good job, again, this year in coming up with a strategy that meets those laudable goals there on the summary page. I'm happy with that. There's some specifics that I guess I'm going to get into after we come back from public testimony that I have as questions. There's kind of a general sense that there are some late-breaking things that are occurring that I'm wondering how we'll want to take into account. For example, the county commissioners today wrote us a nice letter about, my understanding is, requesting that we take on some financial challenges that they're facing and some impacts that they'll have based on things that we're doing with the downtown and so forth. So I'm wondering, it doesn't seem like there's a great deal of flexibility in here for those sort of things, and some of these numbers appear to be ones that may change over the course of this year. So I guess I'm asking a very general question about the level of flexibility.
I haven't seen the county letter yet, so I don't know what's all in that, so I can't respond to that. The flexibility, I guess the place where I would want to try to land at the end of this is that if we're looking at making some flexible changes in the budget process here, that we stay within the budget dollars that are presented as opposed to bringing in new money, because I think that just starts to get us in trouble. So there isn't a lot of flexibility for large items as we move forward, because we have worked very hard at trying to find all those kinds of things. Could you literally find $10, $20? Yeah, $10 or $20. But when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, there's a lot less flexibility unless we're willing to look at what we're not wanting to do somewhere else.
I have time. I won't use it. I'll do it later.
Thank you. Which George? George Poling.
Well, John, I too want to say good job, not only to you, but all the staff, right down to the very last employee that took part in all these conversations. It's a tough decision everybody has to make when looking at a budget crisis like this. having suffered through that budget crisis for 25 years with Lane County, I know how it affects every single employee. So, that's a major undertaking for everybody. I just want to express my appreciation for all the hard work. When you talk about not much wiggle room in the budget and not wanting to take on any other cuts in any services, on the slide where it's what you call the next tier or the next go around, as I refer to it, some of the difficult choices. There's some things in there that I absolutely cannot see us doing.
Yeah.
Not because of finances, but because of what we owe to the citizens of this community. There's going to be a hard decisions to make. I made some notes earlier, more specific that I'll get into maybe if it's not covered later on. But some of those hard choices, when you're talking about affecting public safety,
Yeah.
you're talking about affecting transportation, about economic development, social services, it's going to be really tough. And some of those we just absolutely cannot do. And I think people in this community have realized now where we are financially, and you'll get the few naysayers out there that will say, well, there's still a lot of fat to be cut. Well, it's not there. And we've been told for years that this is coming, and here it is today and tomorrow and the year after that. So we just need to take a real hard look at what John's done, and what the not only John but all the staff has done with this budget.
Chris?
Thank you. I also am really impressed and pleased at the budget you've proposed. You're right. I can see there's not a lot of flexibility in here, and I know it's a difficult budget to try to work with, given the structural cuts we need to make because they need to be ongoing. And for me, it's important to say where in this budgeting process can we still be optimistic. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said the kinds of cuts we're talking about here, the kinds of changes we're talking about here are the structural ones that will sustain us over the long term. So we don't have to keep year after year making these little painful cuts every year of one-time money. I think that's responsible, is to say, let's look at the budget from a standpoint that we can make the changes we need to make so we can keep going. Inherent, though, is the recognition that some of the things we're dealing with this year are not things we're going to, we'll just bring it back next year. These are things we're looking at that will be permanent to the way we operate, and that will affect how we will work with our partners, our neighbors, if you will, and figuring out that relationship, I think, will also be important. And I appreciate what you're trying to do, balancing all the different elements. I mean, one that is of interest to me is what you've done around the social service funding. You've done a really good job on fiscal year 11. So this budget we're moving through with, I'm glad we can do what we can do, everything considered. And we have a year to figure out how we'll talk about the fiscal year 12 budget. And so we don't have to do that in this session, but it's something we'll want to be thinking about for next year. I don't want to make the difficult choices, and I'm glad that you have built a budget where right now we're not having to. But if we want to talk about any changes, we have to remember this is what the option is if we want to make those. So I'm not looking to make a lot of changes in this budget.
Mary Ann?
I think it's been a wonderful job to try to do what we can with what we have, but I'm wondering about the goal towards sustainability, because some programs and services have been cut to their size more drastically than other, and to put them in a sustainable account at the level at which they've been cut this year means that we can't have growth in some programs, or at least restoration in some programs. So we can talk more specifically about that, but sustainability doesn't mean that we have to keep something forever because we didn't have the money this year, or, the same that we don't have to get rid of something else that didn't work out to be cost effective. So if sustainability, I don't want sustainability to mean that we just go along every year and okay the same thing we did this year, it seemed to have been. But we should have the flexibility to adjust up or down some of these goals. And is this just a plan? A budget is a plan. And so, I think we've done a great job for what we have this year. There's some glitches in my mind, but other than that, I don't think there's a lot of change. But there are some programs that have suffered more than others and which may need eventually to be restored or, not be considered unsustainable, because you can't sustain them without a certain amount of cost.
Claire?
Yes. Generally speaking, I think you guys have done an impressive job of presenting us with the tough choices that you've made, and I will be interested to hear what kind of reaction we get from the general public in terms of public comment and places they may see different priorities. But I was glad to see you highlight what the recreation staff had done. It's a shame that we'll have to delay the Amazon pool opening, but that seems a small price considering everything else that's going on, and the fact that they're finding ways to offer more services I think is fantastic. I was on a small subcommittee that looked at the recreation programs 2 years ago and looking for places to trim and recommended that nothing be trimmed and fees not be increased because of the service that was providing to the community in terms of keeping kids active and issues related to health and safety and those kinds of things. So I just wanted to thank the staff for that work. And I'll look more closely at the details of that too in the budget.
I put myself down. I'd like to thank everybody for putting this document together. I think one of the things that I'm very pleased with on staff is how open and upfront they've been in this budget cycle. There have been budget cycles in the past where we had no idea of what was going to be in this document until the Thursday before our meetings. And that made it difficult for us to do diligent deliberations, in my view. And I think that you guys have done an excellent job of keeping at least the citizen members up to date on what your thought processes were, maybe not the specific details, but the direction that we were heading. And that's been very helpful, and I appreciate that. That being said, after going through the documents, there are areas of concern that I have and that I'd like to, get brought up and have some answers made. One of those is in the drastic cuts that are being made in planning and development. As I said earlier, one of the areas that we have an opportunity for increased revenues is in economic development. And if we're gutting planning and development, I'm concerned about that. So I'd like to hear from staff on how they think that that's going to work. And there's other ongoing needs that I see in planning and development that have to do with the growth of this city and how it's going to do, with the UCLA. But there's other paths that are going simultaneous to that. How are we going to grow? Is it going to be mixed use? Is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? And those need professional planners to help guide us along the way, and not necessarily contracted planners that may not know what Eugene's values are. And so I think that keeping the planning department as whole as we can is something that's important to me. So. Alan.
So, John, Sarah, very impressive job of putting together this budget. I thank you to all the staff that put in lots of time at every level, including the execs. I know you guys have worked on this for months and months, and it clearly shows. And the presentation was well put together. I think it shows the thought that went behind this. The difficult choices slide was one of the ones that in particular indicates to me the next level of cuts and changes is pretty harsh. There are a couple of things that I want to talk about in the next couple of weeks. Not thrilled with increasing campus parking costs, in part because there are very, very many students at the U of O that have a hard time just paying tuition and just making it by. Adding cost to them just makes that much tougher for them to be able to stay in school. I'm worried about the Hendricks Park cuts. That's one of our jewels, along with the Rose Garden. Worried about the impacts of that and how that will impact Hendricks Park, and the overall parks maintenance funding problem that we're presented with is a subset of that. I'm worried about the $250,000 in planners being cut out, and worried about the impacts of that. Worried about the impacts of changing the way we do animal control. And there's a couple of questions I had. That one about the reserves. Why is that important? What does it do for us to have that? And where does the 8% benchmark come from? And then the second question I had is about the PERS library levy. I know that in the FY 11 to 12, we see that increase in cost of $6.3 million. How does that break down between those two, and where does it come from? How's that for time?
Joe.
Again, I'll echo compliments to the executive team. Also, I think some stakeholders that should be recognized are the employees and the unions that took COLA decreases, because those are ongoing savings, right, John? When they actually took that reduction for that 1 year, that is an ongoing savings. So it's sad to me that not all stakeholders participated in that, but I do want to compliment labor for doing that. Two things I had questions on, not necessarily addressed now, but when we get back. To Alan's point, just to understand a bit more about the library levy. It looks like they're reducing their drain on the general fund by about $400,000, but just trying to understand how does that relate in context to the levy actually going away. And then the third thing, I know it's kind of the elephant in the room, is just looking at revenue growth from 2010 to 2014. We're growing by about 10% a year, but expenses are growing by 11% a year in that same vein. I know one, for me as a citizen member, I would love to hear from the union leadership as to what they see as solutions moving forward. I mean, we all have to participate in one way or another. I sense as a citizens member that it appears that times the only discretion we have is to cut footprint, to cut FTE. And I know for me as a citizen, I would love to hear from the union leadership if we have tough budgets going forward, or if we have variable budgets, is there some way that we can go deeper together in a partnership, or are they really instructing that really they just wish for us to reduce FTE, which is the easiest, most draconian, and pretty primal thing to do, as opposed to creative solutions that the executive team has come up with in the past. So.
And then Doug.
Yeah, John, I know you know that you're not getting out of this room without me talking about Amazon Pool.
I knew that.
That doesn't mean that I bring a unique perspective to it, and I want to share that both at the savings level and at the service level for that 4-week delayed opening. But in saying that, don't think I don't care about the rest of this budget. I certainly do. The health and welfare of this community means a lot to me. And I will help in the process as much as I can. In saying that, if there's any leadership here from planning and development, I want to give some kudos to you. I'm doing a major renovation of my home, and I was talking to the contractor, and he said when he first came to this community, he was told that don't build in Eugene, build in Springfield, or build outside of the city limits. He says that has all changed from the bids that he's gotten. He says that planning and development is so much better to work with now, and they really look forward to doing that. So if there's anybody, I says, that has a lot to do with leadership.
Scott's in here.
And anyway, I just want to give kudos to planning and development. I don't know who you are, but okay.
Scott is.
The guy with the black sheet.
So I will be speaking.
The guy that's been in charge for 3 weeks.
I'll be speaking to that issue, John.
Okay.
All right, we've exhausted the list. We're at quarter till. We are on time. I would like to adjourn for 15 minutes and come back. Please try and be on time, because we hopefully will have people who are going to be testifying, and they're taking time out of their days to come.
You don't have to be on time.
Hey, you gotta If we could come back to order.
Just can't make money making
You can unput your microphone. Thank you all. Welcome back to the Budget Committee meeting. Now is the time where we are going to take public testimony. I'll read from my little agenda here. The purpose of this forum is to make sure that persons wishing to address the Budget Committee have an opportunity to do so. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Budget Committee members may ask clarifying questions of those testifying and will be given an opportunity to comment on what they have heard from the public at the end of the comment time. Personally, for me, this is a very important time for me as a citizen member of the Budget Committee. I have a limited, scope as to what my purview is on the budget, and I'd like to hear as much other information from the public as we can. So in the upcoming meetings, I encourage anybody to come out, let us know what your feelings are about the priorities that you would like to see us address in the city's budget ongoing forward. So with that being said, we have 2 people that have signed up this evening. First is David Moon, followed by Rich Gaston.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you tonight. My name is David Moon, and I'm president of the Friends of Hendricks Park. I'm going to hand around some copies. Hopefully I have enough of copies of a written testimony so that you have those. I'll try and be brief because I know you have a lot going on and we'll probably have a fairly lengthy meeting tonight, but there are a few points I'd like to kind of stress that's contained in the testimony and that I want to talk about. And number one, we're the Friends of Hendricks Park, but I'd like to say overall we support maintenance funding for all the parks in the city. I think that's very important, and I think they're an important part of what makes Eugene, Eugene. And it's important, obviously, because we feel like deferring maintenance just leads to more problems down the road, and it's going to eventually require additional expenditures in the long term. The second point is, we feel like in order to become sustainable and to make it so that things are better for the future, it's important to support funding for positions that essentially support volunteer efforts and therefore can act as leverage for the funds that you do spend so that the money goes further and volunteers can really help support the parks in that way. We know that you're faced with a lot of tough choices, and we've been trying to talk to people at the Parks and Open Spaces Department to figure out just exactly how this is going to affect Hendricks Park in specific. And there are many cuts that are definitely affecting the park. The park staff is going to be expected to take on a lot of other responsibilities. And one important thing that's happening apparently is it's planned that the forest in Hendricks Park will actually be coming under the jurisdiction or the purview, however you want to put it, of a natural resources group within Parks and Open Spaces, and that allows the staff of Hendricks Park to be utilized elsewhere. The point we decided to focus on, rather than saying, well, we'd love to see money for all these different positions, is we thought we'd focus really on the forest management plan, and specifically also the coordinator of the forest management plan, because that's one of the areas that we feel like could really suffer from the budget changes. The big point being is that the forest management coordinator up there, previously there's been basically $30,000 allocated the last couple of years, and that apparently is going to be completely eliminated, and that includes $14,000 to support this forest management coordinator position. We'd love to see that funding restored because we think that's one of those areas, as we said, where the leverage occurs. The volunteer program is getting more and more successful in Hendricks Park, and we've really been able to accomplish a lot in our partnership that we've had with the city, where the city, of course, spends a lot of funds for Hendricks Park, and the Friends of Hendricks Park have also been able to come up with a lot of different monies to help in that area. So as I said, rather than say we'd love to have other areas of importance, we wanted to focus on the forest and hope that you could possibly restore some funds for the coordinator of the forest management plan.
Thank you. Rich Gaston. Well,
Hey, John, is it appropriate to ask a question or after testimony?
let's do it after testimony.
Very good, okay.
Thank you.
Hello. It's good to see you all again. My name is Rich Gaston, and some of you know I've been quite a harsh critic of past budgets and processes. I'm very pleased with the direction that I'm seeing we're heading, and I appreciate the leadership that I'm seeing in confronting some of the fiscal imbalances that we've been dealing with for many years. I am concerned that we're starving capital reserves and expenditures in favor of headcount, and particularly in light of the continuing imbalance in growth of expenses versus income. And I know that that is probably a discussion for future budgets, but it is a concern of mine. I do have a recommendation. I'm getting a sense through the presentation that there's going to be an intent down the road to move expenses away from the general fund and possibly to local option levies or to bonds. We saw that a little bit with road maintenance, and we had long discussions regarding that process. The piece that I continue to try to communicate is that the city must work very, very hard to communicate with citizens, explain our situation, and build trust that we are an efficient organization. I love the metric of headcount per capita. I track that. I research that. And you can't compare two cities side by side in a lot of cases because they do different things. But at a very high level, we can compare very favorably across the United States to other cities. Other cities may spend more on police. They have more police per capita. But in general, at the high level, Eugene does well, and I think it's a good story. I think it deserves to be told to the citizens because in the lack or in a void of information, people throw around all kinds of urban myths that the city is burning money by the wheelbarrowful, and it's just not true. I lastly would like to speak for those who have no voice in our community, the animals in our community. The cuts that are proposed may seem small in terms of total dollar value of $200,000 proposal, but that is, I believe, a third of the transfer the city makes to the county historically annually for the function at LCAS. And what they will typically be doing is cutting animal control. They have a lot of different functions, but they're going to come after the uniformed officers. That's something that the private sector and the nonprofits that I have experience with as a member of the board of directors at Green Hill Humane Society, that's a gap we cannot fill. We don't have the badges. We can't go into people's homes. We can't go into yards. We can't investigate abuse allegations. We can't pick up sick or diseased or dangerous animals. So that is a piece that I would rather see move to a conversation, a community-wide conversation with the nonprofits and explore long-term solutions. I think it's coming, the writing's on the wall with the county. LCAS will be under pressure in the next several years, and I think we can do some good things with the city. It would be disingenuous of me to recommend restoration of a cut without an offsetting reduction, but I'm out of time, so.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the committee?
Can I ask David, what does the forest planning coordinator do?
He has several different functions. He, number one, of course, works with volunteer work parties that we have up there once a month. He's also worked extensively with all the different restoration efforts that have gone on in the forest. One of the big ones, of course, is ivy removal because, unfortunately, the entire forest up there at one point was completely overrun with ivy. The other big thing they've been involved with in the last couple of years is restoration of the oak knoll. And that was a big project that essentially the Friends of Hendricks Park contributed half the funds and the city contributed half the funds. And what was involved there essentially was in order to maintain and restore an oak savanna, there were lots of fir trees that were taken down, and then there's restoration where once again you have to take out all the ivy and the secondary invasives that come in. So that's been a big part of just kind of coordinating with the city and between the Friends and the city as far as the different restoration efforts that go on.
If $14,000 was found to fund that, would that planning coordinator still be able to do that job, or do they need the full $30,000 in order to do his or her function?
The coordinator could do the job. That's the funding that went to the coordinator's position. There was an additional $16,000 that had been going towards restoration in the forest itself. And naturally, it would be nice to have the whole thing restored, but we're asking that whatever you can restore would be wonderful to get back. And we think that the coordinator position is the most important part of that, certainly.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mike?
Oh,
No.
did you want to go now?
Are we done with questions?
No, we're still, okay.
Crossed him out.
I put myself down. I think we touched on this at our last meeting, that being able to leverage the community and nonprofits and stuff like that is a very integral part in maintaining a sustainable budget. Just for full disclosure, my house is about 100 feet from Hendricks Park, so I kind of have a dog in this fight.
Volunteer coordinator.
But
Volunteer coordinator.
Done.
But I think that we should take a look at this issue. We're saving $14,000, but how much is that really saving us? If we lose the volunteer hours that are going into that, I'm sure it's well over $14,000 in volunteer hours, or I would assume so. And I think it's important for us to maintain these public-private leveraging options that we have, especially on a budget item that is as insignificant in a $500 million budget as this, to help maintain our parks, because that's one of our key problems that we have is we've got lots of parks and we're having trouble maintaining them. And if we can get people to help us do that for free, by having somebody coordinate them, that would be something that I would look forward to.
Joe seemed to have another question or
I'm
comment.
going to put Alan before, or
Well, George Bowling would like to
Okay.
speak to the
George.
general thing, not
All
a
right.
question to our public comments.
all right. So we're still on the public comment questions. Alan?
I think the point that Dave is trying to underscore in his testimony is that over the years in Hendricks Park, there have been hundreds of hours, thousands of hours of volunteer time to work on making that park a better place, especially the Oak Knoll and the Savannah restoration. And the point about the coordinator is that when you have a staff person that does that thing, it leverages an enormous amount of volunteer time and a lot of effort. And we've been doing that for a long time. And what I'm afraid of in Hendricks Park is that we start to go backwards. And the stuff that we've invested in with those different restoration projects and the work there starts to be lost. And this isn't a lot of money here, so I'm going to be very supportive of this and eventually make a motion to restore at least the contract.
Marianne?
I also live near Hendricks Park, and around my kitchen table, we formed a long time, well, a few years ago, the Friends of Hendricks Park. The volunteers are important in other ways than saving money. We have school groups that come and learn about the ecology, the many species of plants and native plants and animals. We have hundreds of them in the park. It's one of the largest urban real forests in the state, next to the one in Portland. And we have the volunteers from the college, from the university, from fraternities, from student groups come and they learn about parks and also about the relationship of plants and animals. And I think that there's an educational feature of that kind of park and the kinds of stuff that's going on there. And the leveraging is absolutely happening. They've raised benefits. They've raised and other community groups to actually look at parks throughout the whole city. And when I moved here, Hendricks Park was being neglected. And that's why we decided, those of us who live near there and walk through it all the time, want to see it become the beautiful natural park that it is. We've still got work to do. And my family also participated in the volunteer work parties. So I think it goes beyond just saving money. It's an educational project for the whole community.
So your public comment, Joe.
Joe?
Well, I don't live in Hendricks Park, but I do.
But you go there.
But I do remember when they used to have elk way back then.
Yes,
Absolutely.
And a zoo.
And a zoo, absolutely. 30,000 is a rounding error. Let's cut to the chase, right? $160 million operating budget, and it sounds like we're making good choices with our parks in terms of reduced hours, instead of mowing twice, we're mowing once, some great options. And it sounds like this is an opportunity to really continue to keep partnering up with, volunteers, for golly's sakes, that participate with it. So I, for one, kind of throw in my support of restoring that funding at the appropriate time.
Mike?
Like Joe, I don't live anywhere near Hendricks Park, and but I do live in North Eugene, where there are a number of city-owned properties that are undeveloped parks. And in our council goal-setting session, I brought up the idea that maybe what we should be doing is utilizing volunteers to at least to some degree, develop some of those lands to some manner of usable format for the neighbors who moved in intentionally, because there was a park slated to be developed in 2010 that's been pushed out to 14 or 15 now. So if we're going to restore volunteer coordinator positions, I would hope that what we're going to do is spread that throughout the community so that those lands that aren't even usable parks yet in North Eugene have some opportunity to leverage citizens and neighbors nearby who are more than willing to both volunteer for that and to use equipment of their own that they own to try to get that work done. So if we're going to do that, I'm very interested to see what we're going to do in North Eugene as well.
You're right.
Anybody else on the public comments? Very good. Thank you all for coming out. Feel free to come back. We'll be having several more of these meetings, and each one of them will have an opportunity for public comment. Moving on to our information requests and the meat of these discussions. First off, I'd like to mention a couple of things. If you're asking for information, that's great. Staff will do their very best to get the information out as prudently and quickly as possible. I've been asked to let you know that, though, that because of part of our budget strategies, the finance department has been downsized, so there may be times where it may come back a little bit later than in years past. They'll work their hardest and get it to you as expeditiously as possible. But have patience with them. They're working hard. They're doing a good job. And if you don't see it tomorrow, well, there may be a reason why. Another thing to mention is in our upcoming meetings, we have some agendas scheduled that may have to do with some of the questions that you might bring up tonight that could be answered further at those. At next Monday's meeting, we have 2 presentations scheduled. The first is going to deal with the animal control issue. And so where you may want to bring that up tonight, there'll be more people here and more people that might be able to answer your questions next week. However, if you have questions that you want them to bring back at their presentation, that this would be an appropriate time to get that out there. Also next week we have Chief Kearns is going to be talking about the public safety component of the budget, and so if there's questions about that, same thing goes on that. The following meeting, which will be next Wednesday, we have Kurt Corey from Public Works coming. He's going to be talking about capital, infrastructure, parks and recs, the maintenance and stuff like that, some of the things that we just discussed here. So again, if you have questions that you think they might want to bring, you can bring those up tonight. Any other topics or questions in this document are fair game. And that being said, I would like to open up the floor for comments.
You've got Mike, George, and me, and Claire.
Mike, George,
And then me.
Claire,
Shanda,
Betty, Shanda,
got her.
Joe,
And
Chris, and Doug.
Let's go around the room.
Just go around the room.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Mike
In order. Thank
gets
you very
to
much.
start.
Yeah.
It's his.
Yeah,
You'll be last.
I jump in there first. All right. It's been a great privilege so far to serve on the ambulance transport subcommittee with the JEO. It's been a real pleasure to work on that. The downside is I've learned some real in-depth information about how bad that problem actually is. Now, I noticed that you've got the $450,000 hole filled with this particular one-time allocation. I would love to hear from the chief, if not tonight, at some future point more in depth about what we project that hole to be throughout the course of this year and next. Based on what I've learned, I think that it has at least the chance to grow in this budget year and in the next couple of out years to grow much, much larger if we don't do something about that. And I would say that in response to one of the things that you said, John, that you hope that's a one-time, one-year plug, one of the things that was expressed in the JEO, as well as in the complete JEO meeting that we had, I thought was that is a critical service, that was an essential service, at least viewed by the electeds. And in our subcommittee work, one of the first things we said was, if it needs general fund support, then so be it, because that's what it is. It's a critical service. So I would hope that we're not taking that option off the table, because that was one of the first things brought up by the joint electeds as a strategy for dealing with that. I know that we've had lots of discussions about free parking downtown, but I'm not going to miss the chance to bring it up because it's not listed in here. Good. And as I recall, we had a discussion around multiple options for dealing with the potential plan to be able to do that, and that was a part of the discussions around downtown. And I don't see it reflected in here, and so I was wondering what your strategy was based on the last conversation. And you don't have to answer that tonight if you don't want to. We can have a longer discussion about it later.
I can respond just on a couple things with respect to the ambulance fund and the hole and the funding. At the end of this year, I think the reserves will essentially be gone, plus or minus. In order to balance the budget for FY11, we're anticipating needing the $450,000, which presumably at the end of FY11, there won't be much in the savings account either. And so it's to kind of bridge that gap across. So we have to present a balanced budget, and so this is the intent, to balance the budget for that. With respect to critical service, not disagreeing that's a critical service, the question is, how do you fund various critical services? Mm-hmm. Wastewater treatment's a critical service, yet it's not general funded at all. And so I think the question, at least the framework for me, isn't so much about the criticalness of the service. It's what are the funding options in order to do that and still try to balance all the other services and priorities that are out there, given sort of a fixed revenue source moving forward, or at least a current revenue source moving forward. So I think we can have some really great discussions as we go forward on that topic. With respect to parking, the parking discussion we will still have at the City Council as part of the whole downtown strategy, and so we haven't landed as a council on a parking strategy. When we land at that point, if it impacts the budget, then of course we'd have to come back with supplemental budgets or appropriations, however to deal with that at that time.
So we're not going to do it as part of this?
I would recommend we don't, because to me it's really a policy decision that the council needs to decide on, and then when the policy decision is made, then it becomes a financing discussion, which then can impact this group or whoever the council chooses to include. So that'd be my recommendation.
Okay, just to start off with, I have a series of questions in reference to the reductions to the animal services. I will submit those in writing. They came to me through citizen contact. So when you see them, it's not my wording, but I think there are some issues that are addressed in some of the questions that do need to be answered. I'm still going through those, so what I'll do is I'll send those out hopefully tomorrow to John and the budget committee, the entire budget committee, so you can see what those questions are. We've been running a $240,000 council contingency, and we're dropping $90,000 out to bring us to $150,000. Do we have any idea of what we've averaged for a leftover over the, say, last 5 to 7 years?
Yes, we do, and we can. Do you want us to say that now, or okay, we'll look it up and then be able to get back.
My thinking is we might be able to adjust that reduction of 90 to even more than that, based on what we've had left over the years. If we're ending the year with, say, 75,000,
Maybe we can reduce it some more. So that would be one place that we might be able to look. And then my understanding on the planning and development, that basically with the downturn in the economy, the permits haven't been there, so we really don't need as many planners and permit people working. Do we have enough fluidity built into that program so if the economy turns around, we start getting an increase in permits, that we can bring people back on to handle the increase in workload without hampering the growth?
Yes. In general, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So we do have so what we try to do in the building permit fund is ideally you have the absolutely exact amount of people that you need on any given day for inspections and plan review. Because those have gone down, the staffing comes down. As those start to come up, then we'll have the capacity to sort of add the staff back in order to meet the
So there might be
uptick.
a little bit of lag time, but not much.
That's what we would hope, yeah. We would want to try to anticipate it, yes.
Okay. And then in reference to the parks, in addition to what Mike has said, I too am interested in making sure the parks in North Eugene are maintained and developed. But can we do an adopt a park program? They do adopt the highways. There's got to be some kind of a program they've got in place as far as liability. And I don't want to go into a second round. Just let me finish this out. But as far as, like, for example, the cutting the fields, having played on some of those city park fields, in the summer leagues and things, it's important to keep that grass cut down. So if we could do an adopt a park where people show up in between times to cut the playing fields, because you're going to, with the shorter grass, you're going to reduce injuries to the people taking part in the athletics out there. So if there's some way we can do an adopt a park, maybe get a hold of ODOT and see how they get around the liability factor. Do that city.
Myrnie had her ears closed on that one, so she. But yes, we'll definitely take a look at those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Friends of Hen's Park's a good example.
Claire.
So I have some questions, but first I wanted to back on your presentation. You said you didn't realize as much as you wanted in terms of the grants for one of those strategies, but I was curious what we did realize in grants, what you did accomplish in there. If you know it now, that's great. If not, you can get back to me. It's more than that.
I'm sorry.
The amount of grant.
The amount that we received in grant?
Well, no, of that 750, do you remember how much?
It's about
150?
About 150.
Okay.
Million?
That's 150 that was just to offset current operations. We brought in significantly more grant revenue for new projects, new capital type things. So, but when we were trying to offset operational expenses, that's what we could get.
And then I had a question about on the conversation around herbal no.
Sorry. You never got started.
I know. I was getting free time, so I can't complain. I was looking through some of the things about urban renewal, and I was wondering, can staff be paid out of the urban renewal district, or does that staff time have to be paid out of general fund?
There's some administrative cost to include staff time that is supported by the urban renewal district right now. And one time I knew the number, but I don't recall it right after. We're happy to get back to you. But yes, there is staff time that's paid for out of urban renewal dollars.
But some of it's also paid for out of general fund for the urban renewal district work? No? Scott's shaking his head no. Okay.
No urban renewal.
Staff time is...
Said two cops are paid out of it, actually.
Scott Llewell, Planning and Development interim director. For a couple of you I haven't had a chance to meet. All urban renewal service category services are paid for through urban renewal. Okay. We have to, as a budgeting law, move it through general fund. So at times it looks like it's general fund, but it really is all tax increment.
Okay, great. And then on page 837, there was a 24% increase in the fleet services fund, and I'd like to know what that's about. Don't need to know right now, but and I appreciated Rich Gaston's comments about animal control officers. I think that is a critical piece in terms of public safety and welfare, that as we're looking at strategies around animal services, that's something to keep, I think, in the forefront, because it isn't something that a nonprofit could be a part of And then lastly, has to do with the strategy around social service and downtown, the public safety strategy, and the idea of the Cahoots van. And it's my understanding that the Whitebird Cahoots folks may have an alternative proposal to purchasing another van. And I think that communication may have just come through, again, late breaking news. So I haven't seen it, but, you know, being part of the Human Services Commission, that's some of the information that I had heard kind of secondhand, that there may be some savings we could realize in that $325,000, that they have an alternative strategy that may still serve what the city is looking for in terms of services downtown, but not require the purchase of a new major piece of equipment. So once you've had a chance to look at what they're proposing, I'd love to see some, since we don't have a lot of wiggle room, this might be a place that we might find some. So. And then I have some other informational questions, but I think I'll put them in an email and send them out.
Shonda.
Well, I was shy in the earlier session, but I wanted to also acknowledge the city staff and the city manager's office for taking a fiscally responsible approach to the budget in terms of looking at staying within the revenues and also keeping an eye on the reserve fund. Yes, we have to make hard choices and decisions. I think it's been mentioned that possibly we have cut the fat as much as we can. I'm wondering if there's a little bit of scraping away of some black in there. And I guess what I'm thinking is in terms of can we find any additional efficiencies or some innovative practices? I think this budget has come up with a lot of unique strategies for cutting costs without significantly reducing critical services or programs. I like the example of the data-led policing. Was wondering if other data management and information technology can provide data and information that could identify additional efficiencies. And this kind of thinking is more, long term, maybe not necessarily for this budget cycle, but looking forward. I know that the city's looking at re-looking at the performance measures. Maybe some program measures can be developed, and then some data tracking around that to help management make decisions around either making services more effective or efficient. So I think I'll leave it at that for now.
I appreciate your comments. A couple of quick things. One is we'll continue to look for improvements on things, and employees will continue to try to find ways to do things differently, better. Hopefully we can save some money as we continue to move forward. So absolutely we'll continue to do that. And then on the whole performance management, part of what we are doing is we used to spend more time of that on the budget side. We're moving that into the summer, so we can actually spend more quality time on that as a whole group. And then we can actually use that to help plan for the budgets coming up, because we'll be able to use that data as we take a look at the budget. So I think your comments were just right on.
Betty?
Thank you. First, I want to follow up on some things some other people said. I agree with George about reducing the contingency fund. I don't think we've ever used it all for contingencies. We end up using it for other things. I think adopt a park's a good idea. I don't understand why volunteers can't work without staff. In a community where I've lived before, volunteers could go and do work without having a staff person oversee them. And as long as they know what they're, like people who've already been working in Hendricks Park, why can't they continue to work without staff being there with them? About the Cahoots, I heard also that they don't need another van, perhaps that they were talking about focusing on downtown, and they're already near downtown. And I agree that's a good, I don't know where I heard that, but I heard it a week or two ago. I have a question. Why would it be Amazon Pool instead of one of the other pools? And it seems to me it's always the south part of town that gets fewer services. It is. I mean, and Peterson Bar still has a recreation program. Our recreation center does not. And there are other pools. Also, we have branch libraries in other parts of town, but not in South Eugene. So I also wondered if you had to cut, rather than cutting library hours in the future here, it would be better to close one of the branch libraries, because we want people to come downtown, and we have all of this space here. Then I have another question, which you won't like, but if I have seen the answer to this, but I don't have it right in front of me. I want everybody to know this. If we terminate the urban renewal district, how much money would go to the general fund immediately and how much yearly? Thank you.
Sarah can answer a couple of your questions.
I'll just hit on a couple of them, and if you want more information, we can. I think we have situations all over town where we have volunteers that aren't working with staff, and I think if you're referring directly to what David suggested, I think what the Friends of Hendricks Park coordinator, that specific coordinator, has been taking the work that was adopted in the Hendricks Park master plan and prioritizing the work that then the volunteers do. So it's not about being out there and standing side by side with the volunteer as much as it is having somebody coordinate the work. So we do have lots of volunteers that work on their own all over town, use equipment, aren't watched but have been trained and have been with us for a while. The second question you asked was about Amazon Pool. Is that because you're sitting next to Doug? No, I'm kidding.
Because I live near it.
I know. So I think what I would tell you, and Renee could maybe add more information if she needs to, but Amazon Pool is a little different than our other pools. It's not covered, so it already has a shorter season. And it does have, typically the users at that time of the year are lap swimmers, water polo teams, groups that are pretty specialized groups. It doesn't generally serve the whole community during that time as Sheldon and Echo Hollow do. And lastly, what I would say is that the amount of maintenance, there's maintenance that happens, so we try to push that season into the fall as far as we can, and then we keep it filled with water during the freeze-thaw cycle, and then there's a certain amount of maintenance that has to happen to the pool in the spring. And so there's some advantages from a maintenance perspective to delaying it because we can do more of the major things in between seasons. It's not a great solution. Nobody likes to have a pool closed early, but that's why. And I think the good news for you out of this is that Recreation is adding some programs at Amazon Community Center as part of this budget. So I think those were the questions.
You'll tell us all about urban renewal later.
We'd be happy to send that information out.
Yeah.
Thank you. Joe?
Two questions, one specific, one subjective, and then request for information later on. If I could get a better understanding of what I just call library math, meaning that just remind me again, what was the library levy that discontinued? And if you net in the $400,000 reduction in the general fund that due to changes that they're making, kind of what's the net drain on the general budget because of that? That's number one. Number two, the reduction in the animal services contract with the county. Admission, I don't know much about them. Are there other alternatives? I mean, i.e. meaning, are we stuck using the county? Are they viewed relative to peer groups? Are they very efficient? I just don't know that much about them, so I'm just curious. That's a subjective question, by the way, but just trying to get an idea of what other alternatives. I think you mentioned, John, their budget was going up 6% or something like that. So
this year from their FY10 budget versus FY9.
Right. So that's all I have.
We'll have to get back to you on both of those.
Library math, all right, okay.
Chris, please.
Oh, thank you. I want to kind of build off of what George and actually Betty were talking about in that if we're talking about, reductions and cuts in hard life, it really serves all of us to participate. And as a counselor, we have an impact on the budget as well. And so the information request I would have is around the council contingency. Is that the only source of money that's used to support the council, or is that just a contingency and there's some other source to support the council? What are the sources of money that support the council? And then what are those supports? What do they look like? I mean, we've talked about food. We've talked about offices, materials and supplies, travel, conferences, trainings. What are all of those ways in which the council has an impact on the budget? Because I think if we're going to ask people to cut, whether it's in the parks or somewhere else, we also need to look at ourselves in terms of what we can do. And I realize you've reduced the contingency by a significant amount of money, but there's still $150,000 in that account there, and that's a lot of money per counselor if you divide it up that way. I don't need to spend that much money for support unless there's legitimate uses for that money. That's what I want to know. What is that money being used for, and what are the opportunities within there? If we could find $30,000 within that, that takes care of the Hendricks Park. I don't think you're going to find $200,000 for animal control, but every bit helps in this budget. And once again, I'm not thinking of it as we'll just cut it 1 year. I want to look at this structurally in terms of what are some of the efficiencies we could find in support to the council that could be ongoing and kind of help out in other areas.
We'll provide that back to the whole.
Thank you.
And Christy had an answer to part of your question.
Hi, Christina. So on the council contingency, we can send you this breakdown of information from fiscal year 06 to fiscal year 10, and the spending out of the account has varied pretty widely. So in fiscal year 2006, for instance, the amount appropriated was $340,000, and the amount spent was $323,000 approximately. But there are things like that get paid out of that account are the voters pamphlet, and sometimes those expenses, depending on the election year, are high. And then special initiatives, the diversity and equity services. So this fiscal year 10, so just to give you an idea, so there was that extreme, and then in fiscal year 09, there was $132,000, $132,500 approximately spent out of the contingency fund. And then for fiscal year 10, we're anticipating right now about $50,000 of expenses, but remember the $150,000 in one-time transfer as well. So, but we can give you guys all a copy of this detail too.
Great, yeah, full breakdown would be great.
And we'll get you the detailed breakdown as well.
Not for support.
No, that doesn't
That's
include
a different
support.
play.
Right, so I don't have that one.
Yeah.
Doug?
I have 3 areas I've been reminded about.
Mary Ann, I've got you on the list.
Oh, I thought you were saying, okay.
I'm sorry.
You're getting closer, but Doug's up first.
I didn't do it.
You make me feel bad now. First and foremost, I have the utmost respect for LRCS and its leadership and Renee Gruby. I wouldn't have anybody else trying to ride the ship than Renee, and the budget navigator, Mike McGee over there, who usually sits in the corner and doesn't say anything, a brilliant mind. So right at the top, what I want to see is the 4-week delayed opening of Amazon Pool taken off the table. And I'll just bullet point this, and I am going to turn in a memorandum in writing to these bullet points, and I'll be more specific. But that delayed opening, that 4-week delayed opening, actually it's 5 weeks. It's 1 week later than it was last year, and then a 4-week proposed for 2011. When this thing was voted on back in 99, 2000, and it was even in the service profile, it was going to be a 6-month opening. There was a $25 million proposal for a year round, but people thought that just wasn't going to fly during that time. It only represents a net savings of $8,000. And I'm sure Betty would be more than glad to put up $8,000 of that contingency to cover that cost.
I was going to do it.
She's going to volunteer.
This area of town is so underserved. We're actually worse off in aquatics than we were 30 years ago. We had 3 full-time, year-round facilities. Now we only have 2. The NRPA recommends, you talk about footprint, 1 public pool per 20,000 population, or 283 square feet per 20,000 population. I'll come back around and just wrap up.
All right.
You.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. First off, on page F3, I just had a question. It's on the special revenue fund, and now we're getting into fine print. I'm going down into footnotes here, but footnote O says, this is the second year in a row that expenditures are expected to exceed revenues. The city is actively looking for new revenue sources such as stormwater and wastewater right-of-way permit fees. If a memo could come back to me as to why we're negative $4 million in the special revenue fund. It's a smaller fund. It's not general fund, but I got a question on that. Secondly, I have several questions that I'd like to talk to the interim planning director about, and I might do that off the timer regarding the staffing reductions. It's something quite serious. And then I also have a question regarding ambulance transport. We're giving them $450,000 to bridge a gap, yet the ambulance transport fund, by my recollections, is transferring $348,000 to the general fund for central services allocation. And I would just like to know, I mean, we're giving it to them out of general fund, and then they're giving it right back to us. Is there a way that we can just eliminate the central, absorb the central services funds ongoing? I don't know. I just, we give it with this hand, and we're taking it back with this hand. So I just would like to know what that $348,000 is for. And I think it has to do with call taking, but just so I know. And with that, I'll move on.
Let me talk just briefly about that, and Sue or Christy or somebody, if I'm way off, let me know. The 348 is probably the CSA. So probably what it is it's the amount of our non-general funds receive general fund support. So, for example, Sue is a general fund employee, but the ambulance transport fund benefits from Sue and her staff, and so they pay a portion, their fair portion of what they use for staff, and that gets allocated through formula to all the funds. And so we could absorb all 348 into the general fund. The question is, how do we get that money? And so then part of that is we kind of either go back to that list of difficult choices list, or if there's some other source to match that, because the 450 is a proposed one-time deal. 348 would be an ongoing forever, and so we'd have to find an ongoing source for $350,000, and that could be that list of closing the pool or the library or whatever that is. So that is the trade-off, but we'll get you more information.
And I've got a second left, so I think that goes to possibly Mike's essential service type thing. It's like, okay, it's an essential service. We're not going to charge them for Christie, and that's how we do it, and we figure out where that comes from. But, okay, we've got Alan.
I said some of these before, but I don't know if people were taking notes. So,
only about a half a dozen people, but yeah.
The reserve, why is that important? What does it do for us? Why is it 8%? PERS, what's the amount? Same with the library levy, and along with Joe's issue of what's the need after we do the reductions in the library. I know we're reducing FTE 80. How many people actually walk out the door because of that? FTE doesn't mean people. I'm interested in the more detail and the impacts of the campus parking cost increase, options for funding the Hendricks Park forest management plan, the impacts and effects and details about the planners going away and how we might be able to do that differently. Animal control, people have already mentioned that. Amazon pool has been mentioned several times, and council contingency, which has also been mentioned several times.
Mary Ann.
Yes, had a number. There's a couple of areas on animal services. The alternative to it don't seem very satisfactory. It appears, and again, I will write this up and send it in, but it appears that it would leave the county to just treat sick and dangerous animals. And animal control is a public health responsibility. Diseased animals carry disease. You're going to eliminate the cattery. Cats carry rabies. The animal control also takes care of rabid raccoons and other wildlife. We have a lot of wildlife, even in our city, because of all the trees and, you know, that sort of thing. So I think we need to look into that, and I will write up some comments on what we can do about animal services to preserve the system for lost animals and keep the feral cats and dogs under control. Parking, I am very concerned that parking might be a good resource to keep downtown lively. You can't park very easily. And I tried to track parking in this, and its revenues and its expenses are distributed all over the place. So whoever can get me a sheet that says, we spent this much for parking, this is our income for parking, this is what parking costs us. One problem with the budget is we have all these different fundings and revenues, and they cross one another. So I'd like to know exactly how valuable parking services is to us. Maybe we can convert our garages into other services for parking, where people that work downtown have to be there. When I worked downtown, I paid $20 or something to have parking downtown. But for people coming down to buy things or get supplies or visit our wonderful galleries and art, parking is a problem. And the third thing is contingency. I'm along with the other people about really understanding the use of contingency funds.
I think you're right about that.
Doug, or is there anybody else for round one before we move on? All right, Doug.
Okay, just to finish up, the DNRPA is the National Recreation Park Association. That's kind of our gold standard, and that's, you know, they make recommendations, and we try to follow those. Like I was saying, they recommend one public pool per 20,000 population or 283 square feet per 1,000 population. Like I said before, we're worse off than we were 30 years ago as far as year-round facilities. So the net savings of this is $8,000. What I would like to do, and and I don't want to be recommending like other recreation service areas find $8,000 for the pools to stay open. What I am saying is work within aquatics and try to come up with $8,000 in a different manner than delaying the opening in Amazon. Because in my written testimony, I'll point out the service impacts that has. There are kids driving to Portland because they don't have a facility here to hone their skills. And that's horrible. So I'll lay those out in detail, but basically I would ask that Renee try to figure out a different way in coming up with $8,000 and a delayed opening in Amazon. If nothing else, that area is so underserved. And I will mention that when that measure passed by the largest margin of any ballot measure during that year. I think that says volumes of people's desires of what they want in that area of town. Thank you.
Alan?
There are some shifts into or out of the stormwater fund. I think Kurt's already figuring on writing a memo about that, but I want to make sure that was happening. Since Mike brought up free parking, I'll always say my refrain, which is free parking isn't free. If we eliminate it, if we did free parking, it would cost the general fund $600,000 up to. So that's why it's not in the budget. There was one more thing, but I can't remember what it was. Come back.
Why do they think commercial people pay?
Joe.
Just 3 requests for information, similar to library math, PERS math, just to get an idea on the impact in 12 and 14, just to kind of make it a little bit more granular for me in terms of exactly what's the size of those increases. 2, piggyback off Alan. I know you're still working on that, John, but maybe as you get closer to that FTE cut, try to maybe drill that down by department. And maybe it may just be a range right now as you're looking at it. And then 3, if appropriate, again, as a citizens member, I would love to hear from union leadership how educate us as citizens members of the Budget Committee, how do they envision working with the city to work through budget gaps, our volatility in revenue. I don't mean to impede on understanding the negotiating part. That's something that's obviously done by staff and the unions, but I just know as a citizens member, I really would like to understand what their philosophy is as they approach the real-life budget gaps and fluctuations that the cities have to work with.
Betty?
Oh, thank you. First, I want to say something about contingency. It has nothing to do with supporting council. It is, if something comes, it's just what contingency means. If something comes up that you didn't know was going to happen, then you use it for that. Like if there is an election we didn't expect and we need a voter's pamphlet. But the reason want to reduce it is it hasn't been used for contingencies. It's been used for whoever comes in and says we need some money. And it used to be that there'd be a whole line of people, and you give some to one group, and doesn't mean they don't deserve it or that's not a good cause, but then someone else wants it, and that's what it's been used for, rather than contingency. And so I think we should have something that's rational, that really would cover what might be contingencies, what's reasonable to expect as contingencies. And that could save a lot of money. The free parking, Mike and I agree on free parking. That's the one thing we agree on, and I guess we could start a movement together. But and Marianne can be our third member. I don't think we've ever gotten a real, I consider it an investment in downtown, really, and one of the best investments in downtown. And I don't think we've ever gotten a real figure of the cost of parking. The cost of the meters, the cost of maintaining the meters, the cost of the personnel to enforce.
Couldn't find it.
And the administration even. So I think, and I don't think we yet know exactly how much it's costing and how much we might gain by getting rid of those costs. Thank you. That's all I have to say. We can go home now.
Very good.
You moved past the budget, is that it?
I put myself down. Couple of questions. Listening to Doug and him representing that the savings at Amazon Pool is an $8,000 savings is all. I would like to know, because it's not broken down as to what the actual dollar amount is, because I can't imagine that you would put that as a bullet point if it were an $8,000 savings. And so if you could break down what those savings are and how they'll be realized, that will help me inform my decision in the discussion process going forward. So that would be something that I would like to see. Piggybacking on what Betty just said, as far as the contingency fund, it seems to me that if we're shooting to have an 8% reserve, which would be upwards of $10 million, a supplemental budget could be adjusted using that as the contingency fund rather than a council contingency fund. I mean, if a contingency came along, there is a pot that you could dip into, and that would be your reserve for revenue shortfall or whatever you want to call that 8% allotment, which would be an ongoing thing. But that's for you guys to decide. And with that, I'll move on. Chris.
Yeah, I really appreciate the notion that the council contingency is just that. It's an unexpected thing, which is why I asked the question the way I did. I'm interested in the contingency, but I'm equally interested in council support. So that's the other piece. So I appreciate that distinction because it is. The second thing is also the notion that for a number of years since I've been on the budget committee, it's always been an interesting situation. I mean, I jokingly call it American Idol budget, where, you know, it's based on who comes and sits at the microphone and pleads their case and then they get money, which is really not the best way to budget. I mean, I realize it's an emotional way to budget and it's a persuasive way to budget, but our budget really shouldn't be driven to a great degree by whoever comes and makes a passionate presentation at the budget committee meeting. That's important information to have, and it may indeed be something that influences us, but I don't want us to automatically send the message that if you come and make a passionate plea to the Budget Committee, you'll get money. Because that's really not the way it's supposed to work. It's supposed to inform us and help us in terms of deciding, are there other things in the budgeting process we want to consider? I think that's a very appropriate use for that. But I don't want that to be heard as, if you make a good enough plea, you'll get money. Because that means the money has to come from somewhere else, particularly in a budget this tight. And so it sounds like a subtle difference, but to me it's a really important one. That we say this budget was very carefully crafted. It's a lot of interconnected dots, and you can't just kind of take it apart and go with different amounts. And so public input's important, but it has to be done in a context, not just a, you come ask for money, you get it.
Mary Ann.
I wanted to discuss the van. I'm wondering, as Claire suggested, if a car dealer might not donate the van. There's a lot of cars not sold on lots this day, and they can take a deduction. Their name could be on it. And then did the $350,000 cover staffing, maintenance, and other things of the van? I'm not sure what that meant. I don't think you buy a van for you have to pay $350,000. So I'd get more details on the van. I think seeking a donation of a van, they could donate it to Whitebird, or I don't know if they can donate it to the city or not legally. So anyway, that was another thing I had. I feel the same as everyone else about the contingency. With the pool, that is the most heavily used pool. And people come from all over town. I go by it frequently, and it's filled from morning to night. And the warmer months are at the end of the summer in our climate. So again, might examine the pool use in those early months. Maybe it is a good idea, and have it open longer later, because we get those warm, hot days in September and August. And anyway, I think they should examine the pool closures, because the pools are very important for many of our youth and family swims.
Shanda.
Oh, okay. I have a couple of random questions, and they don't have to be answered right now. Are the resources at an effective level for information technology? And if not, how much would it be to get it to a level that you think is needed?
It's never.
2, with the creative maintenance for the parks on reducing the number of crews that go out, was it factored in for vehicle costs for that? It looked like you were maybe combining crews, so maybe you only need to take 1 truck instead of 2. Also, what's the policy on idling? I've seen
Yes.
trucks idling in parks while they're emptying the garbage cans. I don't know if that's a big issue or not, but I was looking at the Parks and Open Space and wondering about if money is put toward a capital project for a park, how much does that then increase the budget in terms of maintaining the new capital? And that's, I know it's not a very specific question where you could probably give me numbers, but just sort of something that I've been wondering about. Curious about the pool. I know this is being talked about a lot. Would opening it later impact swim meets? Because I know that I live across the street from it, and there's swim meets a lot in the spring and stuff, so I don't know if it's going to impact that. Also, someone mentioned it was the highest used pool. Is there data on how much use pools get and how much use during certain times of year, things like that? So that's it.
I was just going to say, some of these, we can just send you information. We do have a no idling policy, and that's a citywide policy, but we can send it to you if you're interested in seeing the details of that.
Maybe it needs to be enforced.
And I think another thing that would be interesting for you to read, because I don't think we had done this before you came on the budget committee, but last year, the Parks and Open Space crews, when they started trying to figure out how to do work more efficiently, put a challenge out to their employees that was, how can we reduce our fuel consumption by X percent? And I can't remember what.
5% originally.
And they overshot that goal by doing exactly what you're saying. They turned in vehicles, they changed the way they scheduled where they were working, and so I think they will continue to do that. It's been a big story, and we'll send you the council newsletter.
There's actually, they saved 21%.
Yeah,
Fuel
he remembers numbers.
Fuel.
But those are all good questions. The capital versus maintenance question, what we have done in the past, I used to work in parks, and so that's why I'm kind of just answering some of those questions. We have tended to not keep up maintenance-wise with what our capital investments are, and I think you'll hear that when Public Works comes next Wednesday to talk to you. We have, we'll put bonds out and get money to buy new parks, and we'll often get new money to build or use SDCs to put the infrastructure in, but we've lagged behind over the years in terms of wanting to put out a levy or anything to maintain it. So they've been working really hard to be innovative and absorb that.
SDCs are?
System development charges, sorry.
Thank you.
So we get that in detail next week.
Okay, I put myself in the list. And I know you guys are getting inundated with requests and stuff, but I would just like to ask John or staff, there were a couple of initiatives that we spent a lot of time on in last budget year. And I would just kind of like to know where we're at on some of those. First is the police facility at Country Club Road. It's been a year since basically that got approved, and I don't know where we're at on that. Another one was the unused surplus properties that the city owns.
Yes.
And
What's that?
apparently there was a memo that went out on that, if it could be resubmitted, because I can't remember the gist of that. That would be nice. And you can answer those after I think. One of the other concerns that I want to bring to this body is, and we may not be able to adjust it or get to it, but there's, you say the road fund is stabilized, but we spent a lot of the last 5 years talking about the road fund and the problems that have been in it, and a lot of hours have been spent on dealing with that. Luckily, the last legislative session has helped us out with that, but there's still issues in the road fund. And one of them that is a key one that hasn't been addressed, at least in my view, is the unimproved streets that we have out there. There's a lot of roads out there that don't have sidewalks and streets but are in crappy condition. And I think it's part of our duty to bring that up, talk about it, and try and find some sort of a solution to that. It may not be in this budget year, but just because the road fund is in the white and not in the red this year, it doesn't mean that we need to stop thinking about some of these capital projects that are ongoing. Just because we can get by another year, there's still issues that we need to talk about when Kurt comes on next Wednesday. Robin.
Well, I want to also thank the staff for putting this document together. I've read the last year one. I'm hardly reading this one, so I can say it's easier to read and comprehend. I haven't come to the end, but of course you don't have the measured indicators, and we know that you're working on that. So for me, that don't understand everybody's citizens' needs is like you're asking my opinion, but I don't have the instruments in front of me to see the demand for those. And I usually buy something when I know what it costs and what it benefit it provides. So given that we are going to get that the next year or a year later, I'm happy about it. But looking at it, the issue here, I can see a lot of my good colleagues are looking at the ways of maintaining different services, and that's fine. I'm the type who's looking for cuts, because if I have a family which we have less money to live with, we sit together and see where can we cut. And to make that decision, you need to have some basis of what the cut would cost you, what you're giving up. Now, I see in the difficult choices presentation, you have outlined some what difficult choices are. And I was wondering whether you have put some thought of what the benefits of this cut in the financial term is and what the risk is by implementing it. I mean, that would then give me a menu and I put my 2 cents in, yes, you know. Otherwise, for me, it's sort of very difficult to participate, you know, in this discussion. Thank you.
Alan?
Could you get us the detail on, I'm looking at the balancing attachment A, the strategies. Number 29, the miscellaneous revenues has a whole bunch. Can you get us the details on that, how much it would cost? Comment that John made, the road fund is not okay. The operation and maintenance aspect of the road fund is okay. The backlog is still, I think the last one we had was $150 million. That doesn't include another 70 million or so, 60 million for unapproved streets. So it's that backlog problem that we still have to come to grips with completely. Which leads me to a question about strategy number 22, which is the bike path and pedestrian bridge operations. How is that different from the bond monies that were in 36 million that go towards improving bike paths? What's the difference there?
We'll probably have to ask Kurt to address that when he does his that piece.
And another question is on the library. How much of the money that the library collects actually stays within the library? Or does it go to the general fund and then it gets allocated? So does the library keep its library fines and things like that?
It's a general fund operation, so all the revenue collected goes to the general fund pot and then is redistributed through the budget process. So
Right. So what would it, how much money does the library collect in fines and things like that would be the question.
Okay, we can get the detail on that.
That would be good to know.
Anybody else care to have questions or comments?
Are there any June meetings, just scheduling?
No.
Thank you, just checking. All right.
We're in May.
Well,
Yes,
I hate to disagree with my friend Betty, but my years of experience with running volunteer programs is that you don't really keep or sustain any kind of volunteer program that sustains itself without somebody in charge of that program to lay out, first of all, train the volunteers who may not be trained, be aware of the restrictions or laws or whatever are needed to do the job, and therefore volunteers who are very good at getting together and starting a fundraising or something, but even they elect usually somebody to head it up. So it's not a sustainable kind of part of a budget, but the coordinator of volunteers, however we structure that, it could be for 2 parks or something, is necessary to have an effective volunteer service. There are also dangers in somebody not being in charge of volunteers. Lots of things can happen by so-called volunteers.
Okay. Anybody else have anything that they would like to bring up at this point? All right, so just going over our schedule coming up. So we have a meeting next May 3rd. It's a work session. That's going to be animals. The main emphasis is going to be animal control and public safety. The following one, Wednesday, May 5th, will be public works, parks, facilities, all of those types of things. Then we go on to May 12th, and 2 on May 17th, and then the final budget action on the 19th. We were hoping that if there are going to be intended motions, that you start getting those in hopefully by the May 12th meeting. I mean, you can bring intended motions at any point, but it would be nice to have an idea of what is going to be coming on the horizon so that we can prioritize the discussion. You know, if we see one that's going to take a 2-hour discussion, we want to know that as far in advance as we can, so that we can get through this on time and ahead of schedule and with the best outcome possible. At that point, John, is there anything that you would like to leave us with before we adjourn early?
Information requests, if you think of those, send them to Mia, so we can coordinate those all through one person, and then we'll send them back out to the entire group, so that will just make it more efficient that way. Anything else?
Okay. As far as, I mean, just listening what I heard, there was a lot of requests for information. So keep in mind that we flooded them with a lot of requests for information. Some of them will be easy. Some of them will be more difficult. I've been told that the packet goes out tomorrow for next Monday's meeting. So there's probably not going to be much in the packet. They'll try and get as much to us electronically before Monday's meeting as they can, and there probably will be a packet on your desk when you come next Monday. But we'll do our best to have as much information as.
Maybe I should mention one thing in those veins. If some of the information is sort of general information versus you need to have some information because you're thinking about making a motion, if you can let us know a little bit around that, because we can prioritize. And so if it has to do with a motion you're going to be making, we'll prioritize that higher than just good general information, because they will be working through the weekend, I'm sure, getting information. So we'd like to keep that down a little bit.
John, can you just, for me, just give a sample, an example of a sample motion? I believe citizen members can make a motion, I believe. Just.
I'll give a sample motion. I move to direct the city manager to fund Amazon Pool for the 4 weeks directed, and that could be the motion. It could go further and say, using funds from the council contingency to backstop that amount, which would be further more information. But those would be the types of sample.
Thank you.
I second that.
You already got your first motion.
Now, the motion that was most requested coming into this meeting was from city staff, and that was to pass the budget as presented this evening, so we could all go home. But no, but that motion hasn't made the table yet. I didn't quite do that.
How much money would that save if we just passed it?
There we go.
Yeah, Budget Committee support.
It'd be like 4 meals. All right, with that, we will close till next Monday. Thank you.
Good job.